Good. Are you going to be able to make it for the whole thing?
Say that again.
Are you going to be able to make it through the whole thing here?
I hope so.
Okay, I hope so too. But I would say you should count it because you're here. Good to see
Okay.
you.
Nice to see you too.
I'll talk with you.
Yeah.
Okay, Tov, everyone. Early Chag Sameach. I know there are people that have joined online, and welcome to them as well. Welcome to everyone. Because we have people on site, we need a minyan on site in order to say Kaddish, etc. So now that we've started to have people here, so and we do not have 10 yet. So we are going to assume that unless we get extras, we'll be davening without a minyan. And we'll do the best we can. So we begin with Bechorot Shachar, page 6 in the daily.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lasech bivina le'avchin ben yom u'ben laila. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shasani b'tzalmo. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shasani Yisrael. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shasani ben chorin. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam pokeach ivrim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam malbish harumim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam matir asurim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam zokef kefufim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam rokah haaretz al hamayim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam sha'asa li kol tzorki. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamechin mitzadei gaver. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam azer Yisrael b'gvura. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam oter Yisrael b'tifara. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hanoten layav koach. ותהננו היום ובכל יום לכן ולחסד ורחמים ביניך ובין חורנו ותגמלנו חסדים טובים ברוך אתה אדוני גומל חסדים טובים לעמו ישראל. אשרינו מה טוב חלקנו ומה נעים גורלנו ומה יפה ירושתנו אשרינו שאנחנו משכימים ומעריבים ערב ובוקר ואומרים פעמיים בכל יום שמע ישראל אדוני אלוהינו אדוני אחד. קדש את שמך מקדישי שמך וקדש את שמך בעולמך וישועתך תרים ותגביה קרננו ברוך אתה אדוני מקדש את שמך ברבים. We'll continue on page 14 with Psalm 30. מזמור שיר חנוכת הבית לדוד. הפכת מספרי למחולי, פיתחת שקי ותעזרני שמחה, למען יזמרך כבוד ולא ידום, אדוני אלוהי לעולם עודך. ברוך שאמר, page 16. ברוך שאמר והיה העולם ברוך הוא. יחיד חיי עולמים, מלך משובח ומפואר, עדי שמו הגדול, ברוך אתה אדוני, מלך מולל בתשבחות. הודו לאדוני כי רוב ישמור ימים עלילותיו. כי כל אלוהי העמים אלילים, אדוני שמיים עשה, הוד על לפניו וחדווה במקומו. רוממו אדוני אלוהינו וישתחוו לאדון רגליו קדוש הוא, רוממו אדוני אלוהינו וישתחוו להר קודשו, כי קדוש אדוני אלוהינו, והוא רחום יכפר עבוד ולא ישחית. אדוני צבאות עמנו משגב לנו אלוהי יעקב סלע אדוני צבאות אשר אתה בוטח בך אדוני הושיע המלך יעננו ויום קורנו הושיע את עמך ברך נחלתך הרי מנשאם את העולם. ואני בחסדך בטחתי יגל ליבי בישועתך שיר על אדוני כי גמל עלי. Continue middle of page 20. יהי כבוד אדוני לעולם ישמח אדוני במעשיו. והוא רחום יכפר עוון ולא ישחית והרבה להשיב אפו ולא יאיר כל חמתו אדוני הושיע המלך יעננו ביום קורנו אשרי יושבי ביתך עוד יללוך סלע. תהילת אדוני דבר פיו ויברך ובשר שם קודשו לעולם ועד ואנחנו נברך יחד מעתה ועד עולם הללויה 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 נפשי את אדוני. אדוני שומר גרים יתום ואלמנה יעודד בדרך השם יעבד ימלוך אדוני לעולם אלוהיך ציון לדור ודור הללויה הללויה כי טוב זמרה אלוהינו כי נעים נאוותי לה. מגיד דבר רב יעקב, חוקיו ומשפטיו לישראל, לא עשה כן לכל גוי ומשפטים בל ידעום, הללויה, page 24. הללויה, הללו את אדוני מן השמיים, הללוהו במרומים. וירם קרן אמות אל הלכו חסידיו לבני ישראל עם קרובו, הללויה. הללויה, שיר לאדוני שיר חדש, תהילתו בכל חסידים. לאסור מכם בזיקים ונכבדהם בחבלי ברזל, לאסור בהם משפט כתוב, ודרו לכל חסידיו, הללויה. הללויה, הללו על בקודשו, הללוהו בקריאו זו. הללוהו בצלצלי שמה, הללוהו בצלצלי תרועה, כל הנשמת אליה, הללויה, כל הנשמת אליה, הללויה. ברוך אדוני לעולם אמן ואמן. ברוך אדוני אלוהים אלוהי ישראל עשה נפלאות לבדו, ברוך שם כבודו לעולם וימלא כבודו על כל הארץ, אמן ואמן. Please rise, page 26. ויברך דוד את אדוני לעיני כל הקהל, ויאמר דוד. אתה הוא אדוני האלוהים אשר ברכת באברהם והוצאתו מאור כסדים ושמת שמו אברהם ומצאת את לבבו נאמן לפניך וחרות עמו ברית. והים בקעת לפניהם ויעברו בתוך הים ביבשה ורודפיהם ישלחת במצולות כמו אבן במים עזים ויושר אדוני ביום ההוא את ישראל ממצרים וירא ישראל היד הגדולה אשר עשה אדוני במצרים ויראו העם את אדוני ויאמינו באדוני ובמשה עבדו אז ישיר משה ובני ישראל. אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד, כי לאדוני המלוכה משה בגויים, ועלו משה בארץ ציון לשפוט את הריסה, והייתה לאדוני המלוכה. והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו אחד. ישתבח page 29. ישתבח שמך לעד מלכנו. ברכות ודעות מעתה ועד עולם, ברוך אתה אדוני, אל מלך גדול בתשבחות, אל ההודעות אדון הנפלאות, הבוחר בשירי זמרה, מלך על חיי העולמים. Middle of page 30. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, יוצר אור ובורא חושך, עושה שלום ובורא את הכל. May be seated middle of page 30 onto 31. כולם אוהבים, כולם ברורים, כולם גיבורים וכולם עושים בהם אוויר הרצון קונם, וכולם פותחים את פיהם בקדושה וטהרה, בשירה וזמרה, ומברכים ומשבחים, ומפארים ומעריצים, ומקדישים וממליכים, את שם האל המלך הגדול, הגיבור והנורא, קדוש הוא. וכולם מקבלים עליהם על מלכות שמיים זה מזה, ונותנים רשות זה לזה, להקדיש לאוצר בנחת רוח, בשפה ברורה ובנעימה קדושה, כולם כחרונים, ואומרים מלכים ביראה. קדוש 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 אדוני צבאות מלוך כל הארץ כבודו. באופנים וחיות הקודש ברש גדול מן השאים למצרפים לעומתם משבחים ואומרים ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקום עולל ברוך נמותיתנו. אור חדש על ציון תאיר ונזכה כולנו מהרה לאורו ברוך אתה אדוני יוצר המאורות אהבה רבה אהבתנו אדוני אלוהינו. אבינו לשלום מארבע כנפות הארץ ותוליכנו קוממיות לארצנו כי אל פועל ישועות אתה ובנו בחרת מכל עם ולשון וקרבתנו לשמך הגדול סלע באמת להודות לך ולייחדך באהבה ברוך אתה אדוני הבוחר בעמו ישראל באהבה נאמן Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Adonai Elohechem Emet. דור ודור קיים ושמו קיים וחיצון אחור ומלכותו ואמונתו לעד קיימת. אמת שאתה אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו מלכנו מלך אבותינו גואלנו גואל אבותינו יוצרנו צור ישועתנו פודנו ומצילנו מעולם שמך אין אלוהים זולתך עזרת אבותינו אתה הוא מעולם. Middle of page 35, followed by the silent Amidah, beginning page 36. Tilod el Elyon Baruch Hu Mevorach, Moshe v'nei Yisrael lechanu shira b'simcha raba v'amru chulam. Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi kamocha nedar b'kodesh, nora tilot osef eleh. שירה חדשה שבכל גאולים לשמך על שפת הים, יחד כולם הודובים לכו ואמרו, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. צור ישראל קומה בעזרת ישראל, ופדה חינומך יהודה וישראל. גואלנו אדוני צבאות שמו קדוש ישראל, ברוך אתה אדוני גל ישראל. Ashrei, page 78. Ashrei Yoshevei Beitecha Yelalucha Salar. תהילת הרידה ברבי ויברך ובשר שם קודשו לעולם ועד ואנחנו נברך ים את עבר עולם, hallelujah. Continue on page 80. ובא לציון גואל ולשב בפשע ביעקב נאום אדוני. ואתה קדוש יושב תהילות ישראל וקרא זה אל זה ואמר קדוש 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 אדוני צבאות מלוא כל הארץ כבודו. ותישאני רוח ושמע אחרי קורש גדול ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו. אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. ויבטחו בך יודעי שמך כי לא עזבת דורשך אדוני אדוני חפץ למען צדקו יגדיל תורה ויאדיר. עלינו page 83. עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל. ונאמר ואדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו אחד. Psalm for Fridays on the top of page 90. היום יום שישי בשבת שבו היו הלוויים אומרים בבית המקדש. עדותיך נאמנו מאוד לביתך נאווה קודש אדוני לאורך ימים.
To the myriads of people who are here. Shekola, Zachary, and Chag Sameach to everyone. Get used to how to handle the computer and to handle the hosting at the same time, because I want to be able to share the screen for the Siyyum. Again, Boker Tov, everyone, and Chag Sameach. I'll give people a minute to take tefillin off in their talit, and then we will continue with some learning. So now I can say Boker Tov to everyone. For the Siyyum this year, I studied the Mishnah from everybody's favorite Masechet, everybody's favorite tractate of the Talmud, Masechet Bechorot, which is the only tractate of the Talmud which really deals with prayer. There are some references in other places, but and I've studied and taught Brachot a lot, but I'd never had actually gone through the entire Mishnah systematically. And then I focused on one of the prakim in one of the chapters in Gemara, and that is the 5th chapter, which I had never actually studied and really found fascinating for many different reasons. And I've chosen 2 sections from chapter 5 of Brachot to share with you this morning as a Siyyum. One from the beginning of the Masechet, the beginning of the tractate in the Gemara, and one from the end. And I'm going to share the screen. Hopefully I am. So that those who are, hopefully people can now see this, and who are online. Can somebody who was on Zoom nod their head and say they can see the text? Oh, good. I'm getting a thumbs up. Good. So let me begin with a bracha for Torah study, which we'll say together. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Asher Kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. I want to share 2 sections of this chapter with you, and the first, as I say, comes from the begin, comes from towards the beginning of the Masechet. And the Mishnah says, "Ein omdim lehitpalel ela mitoch koved rosh." You can only stand and pray, and this is referring to the Amidah, because the word lehitpalel, to pray, in the Mishnah usually refers specifically to the tefillah, the prayer, namely the Amidah, the Shemona Esrei as we know it. And you can only begin to pray. I'm not sure I love the translation, but that's okay. I used it anyway. Mitoch koved rosh, with a sense of respect, a sense of proper attention, and in many senses, kavanah. Chasidim harishonim hayu shoim sha'achat u'mitpalelim. There was a tradition that the early generation of pious people would wait 1 hour and then pray. Shohim means they would kind of delay their prayer while they still apparently stood and meditated. But here's the part, well, Kadeshia, so that they could direct their hearts towards God. But here's the part that I'm interested in and I want to share with you. Afilu hamelech shoel bishlomo lo yeshivenu. Even if a king greeted one as they were even waiting to pray, apparently, but certainly as they were praying, one should not respond to that king. V'afilu nachash karov al kevo lo yafsik. Even if a snake would be wrapped around one's heel, one should not interrupt their prayer. That's the statement of the Mishnah. Now we read from the Gemara, and you'll see why I'm teaching this to you. Well, I'm not teaching you because there are any snakes or kings around, but because of a point that's important. Amar Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar teaches, Gedolah tefillah yoter afilu hamelech shoel bishlamo yeshivenu. Rabbi Elazar says, we're learning it in the Mishnah. Tefillah is so important that even if a king were to interrupt one would not answer. Amar Rav Yosef responds, Lo shanu ela l'malchei Yisrael. They only taught this about Jewish kings. Aval l'malchei umot ha'olam posek. But if a non-Jewish king comes and interrupts you during prayer, stop and show the proper amount of respect. A lot of the commentaries say, for example, so they don't chop your head off or whatever it might be. But the idea is that the king, that if you are communing with the King of Kings, a Jewish person, Jewish king would understand that. But somebody who's not Jewish, and by the way, this is something that's interesting. Forget about kings for a moment. I often find myself in the back of the synagogue and somebody will walk in. And if it's somebody, while I'm davening the Amidah, and if somebody is familiar with the prayers, I don't interrupt. If somebody isn't, I will interrupt at least to hold up a finger and say, just wait 1 minute or something like that. Or in some cases, have even interrupted my prayer to answer their question or whatever, which I don't like to do, but sometimes the whole concept of derech eretz enters into it, of proper behavior, but we'll leave that for another time. And then he says, Afilu nachash koruch ala kevo. Even if a snake was wrapped around his ankle, lo yafsik. Amar Rav Sheshet says they only taught it about a snake, but not about a scorpion. And the commentaries say also poisonous snakes count as scorpions in this case, and you certainly interrupt the prayer. But the Mishnah has this idea that one is protected during prayer, and one is protected from what a king might do or what a snake might do. But the Gemara comes and says, let's be realistic about this. Let's be pragmatic about this. It's a theological statement as well, that you have to take care of yourself and you don't depend upon the fact that you're praying to keep you from harm, which is, I think, a departure from the original statement of the theological statement. But here's why I brought it to you. I had a teacher at the seminary, professor at the seminary, I'd like to tell you a little bit about. This particular professor taught us something. The professor said, you as rabbis have to be familiar with the fifth book, the fifth section of the Shulchan Aruch, the medieval law code. Now, we knew enough to know that there were 4 sections of the Shulchan Aruch. But this professor said, I want you always to remember the 5th section of the Shulchan Aruch. I don't know if any of you heard this story. I don't think he made it up. It was his statement, though, and this person was the only one to say it to us. What's the 5th section of the Shulchan Aruch? There's Orach Chaim, there's Yoredeya, there's Choshen Mishpat, there's Even Ezer. The 5th one, this professor said, was common sense. That's the 5th chapter, the 5th section of the Shulchan Aruch. And you have to use that as much as you use the other 4. So here's my question. What one characteristic that professor have that no other professor had? That professor was the only blank professor I had in all my years at the seminary. Anyone want to guess? I'm sorry? I'm glad you said that, because that was the answer that I expected, female. And the answer is no. I had other female professors. This was not. This was the only Sephardi professor I had at the seminary, right? Rabbi Josefa Orzi Chronoli Vrachal died a couple of years ago, and I will never forget what he taught us. And you can take that as you think about Kitniot and other things at Pesach, but we won't get into Kitniot today. But it was a brilliant statement to teach us all that, in fact, common sense has to fit into our observance of halacha as well as the principles of halacha. So again, I will never forget that line. It was brilliant, and hopefully most of us took it with us. Anyway, now let's look at the very end of Masechet Brachot. Sorry, chapter 5 of Masechet Brachot. Amar Rabbi Chia ba'arba, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Al yitpalel adam ela b'bayit sheyesh cham sheye. Sorry, did I skip a section that I wanted to do? Wait 1 second here. No, it comes later. Amar Rabbi Chia ba'arba, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Al yitpalel adam ela b'bayit sheyesh cham chalono. One of my favorite sections of statements about prayer in Jewish tradition. One may only pray in a house with windows. We'll get back to it in a minute. That Daniel, it says in the book of Daniel, had an attic and there were open windows facing Jerusalem, and there he prayed. We'll get back to that in a moment, but let's do the other part first. Amar Rav Kahana. Rav Kahana says, Chatzif alai manda matzle v'vakta. I consider it impudent, improper, if you pray in a valley or in a field. Probably more a valley, but let's call it a field for the time being. What's wrong with the field? Well, some of the commentaries say a field is a place where a lot of people are around, and you shouldn't really pray in a place where there are a lot of people around. You should find a private place. Others said that he was responding to the elevation, that one shouldn't pray in a valley. One should seek about praying in the highest place one can. I kind of like that part of it better. I think that fits better. The idea that one should be elevated during prayer, even physically, if it's at all possible. But then there's a very interesting statement. Amar Rav Kahana chatzif alai man demefaresh chetei. I consider impudent one who specifies his or her transgression during prayer. It's not proper, says, to explicitly state how you have sinned. This is Rav Kahana's statement, and it seems to go in the face of everything we talk about on Yom Kippur, where you have to, and the laws of tshuva, you have to be able to verbalize what you did wrong in your life, and you have to be able to say to God, I confess that I did X and Y, etc. Rav Kahana says that's improper, because if you mention it, it means you're not ashamed of it. And better you should be ashamed of it than you should mention it. It's very interesting that Rav Kahana's statement did not find its way into practice in Jewish tradition. In fact, we're supposed to, however, obviously not publicly, although we do that on Yom Kippur as well as a community. So it's interesting to think about the balance here of what Rav Kahana is saying, of what does it mean to be able to say during prayer, I did X and Y. His statement is, in Psalms 32, happy is the one whose iniquity is forgiven, whose transgression is covered over. You cover over your own sin. You're not proud of it. And that's an interesting psychological statement. And you can go either way with it, but our tradition clearly has focused away from what Rav Kahana says and more into the idea of specifying our sins. But now I want to go back to the part about windows very quickly. And those of you who might have listened to my podcast or read my piece online on my blog will know where this is going. There are two reasons given in the tradition as to two dominant reasons as to why you should pray in a room with windows, and to which I would add two more. Rashi says the windows cause the person to prayer to direct their heart with kavanah, so that it would look to the heavens and be humbled. That you have to be able to look to the heavens. And in fact, I read a whole commentary on this about how there are many people who argue that the windows have to be a certain height and they can't be at the floor, they have to be at the top. The idea was you have to look to the heavens and be humbled. The other idea comes from the text itself, and Maimonides says in the Mishnah Torah, you have to face towards Jerusalem, as Daniel did. That facing towards Jerusalem will give you the inspiration for prayer. I don't know how facing towards Jerusalem in Ann Arbor really gives me the inspiration of prayer that a window can help other than that. So I'd rather go for the first one, talking about the idea of being inspired by the natural world to the extent that we can see it through the windows, but it can be looked at either way. But there are two other reasons that I believe it's important to think about windows. First of all, I think it's important for us to be able to be connected with what's happening outside, even during prayer, that we can't look at prayer as something that separates us from the world, but something that connects us to the world. Some of you may remember an incident that happened here at Beth Israel on a Shabbat morning, where there was something happening outside that actually had a connection with a family from the congregation during Shabbat morning services. And it was unfortunately a very sad event. And the reason we knew about it was because we saw all the commotion taking place outside and were able to respond very quickly to it. But it doesn't even mean that. It just is the idea that we need to be able to focus on not only what we're thinking about, but what's happening at the world at large. And the windows keep us from being too closed in during prayer. I appreciate the idea of the ancient Hasidim waiting an hour and being so absorbed in prayer. But there's a world out there and we need to balance those two things. And the other reason why windows are important, and this I'll conclude with relating to Pesach, is because then people can see in. And I think that's really important. I think one of the principles of Jewish ritual, as far as I'm concerned, is its openness. And we're far away from temple times. We're far away from the times where the high priest would go into the Kodesh HaKodashim on Yom Kippur and people could only guess what he was doing in there and not know. Everything is wide open. There's nothing going on behind the curtain, so to speak, or whatever it might be. There's no magic taking place. Sometimes people wish there were a little bit more awe and magic involved, not magic in that sense, but awe and mystery involved in Jewish ritual. It would add another piece to it, but that's not what we do. Everything is open. And the bema is right in front of everyone and everybody can see. And I like the idea that people can see in from the outside. Jewish people who might be outside, who might take comfort in the fact that there's a minyan taking place, even if they're not part of it, or who might say, I didn't realize it was a synagogue in town. I didn't realize it was services. I forgot it was Sukkot or whatever it is, and can come in and join. It's a very important thing. But also people who aren't Jewish. I think for people who aren't Jewish to walk by and to be able to see what's happening inside can be extraordinarily inspiring, and can, in fact, even though, of course, people might be, wearing a talit or taking the Torah, they don't know what that might be, but they still know that we're not hiding anything. There's nothing secretive going on. And that they can be part of this in essence and absorb what's happening. That brings me to Pesach. And this is what I spoke about on my podcast briefly, and certainly in my blog piece. On Hanukkah, we light the Hanukkah lights and we place them in the window, and we say Persuma Nisa Lefarsem Nes, to publicize the miracle of Hanukkah. I think on Pesach, we should take extra care to make sure that our blinds, our drapes are open if we're having the Seder in a room that faces out into the street, especially. Because I just imagine how beautiful it must look, how interesting, how wondrous it might look for somebody walking outside who's not familiar with Pesach, to see people sitting around the table, to see the fact that this is an extraordinarily special night, that people of all generations, of all are sitting, and if they stand around long enough, see them talk to each other or sing, or in some way, this is Persuma Nisa. This is publicizing the miracle, as we do with the Hanukkah candles. And it's publicizing two miracles. It's publicizing the miracle of Pesach at the Exodus, Yetziat Mitzrayim, and it's publicizing the miracle of the survival of the Jewish people for thousands of years, despite persecution, despite all of the attempts, as we say in the Haggadah, Bechol Dor V'Dor, in every generation, there are threats to our existence. And people would realize that what's kept us together for 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years is our commitment to tradition, and hopefully as well our use of common sense, which has made us be able to adapt our traditions to the meanings of the time and to be able to survive with traditions by continuing to evaluate them, by continuing to expand on them, and continuing to use a pragmatic sense of what will work in today's world. So with that, we'll conclude. I can't do Kaddish de Rabbanan because we do not have a minyan, but I will say, Hadran Alech Masechet Brachot. We will return to you, Perek Hamishi, chapter 5 of Masechet Brachot, and to the entire Mishnah. We will, traditionally we say, Datan Alach Masechet V'Danan Alach Lo Nitnashem Minach Masechet Brachot V'Lo Titnashem Minan. We will not, you will keep your mind on us. We think of the Masechet, the tractate, as having characteristics of human beings in essence, and we will not forget you, and you will not forget us. Yehi ratzon mefanecha Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei avotenu shetei toratcha u'manatenu b'olam hazeh v'tehi imanu li'olam haba. May it be your will, our God and the God of our ancestors, that we should be loyal to your Torah, that we should make the Torah our work in this world, and it should be with us in the world to come. Arev na Adonai Eloheinu et divrei Toratcha b'finu b'fiot amcha Beit Yisrael v'niyeh kulanu anachnu v'tzatzeinu v'tzatzei amcha Beit Yisrael kulanu yodim shemecha v'lomdei Toratecha le'olam lo eshkach pikudecha ki bam ki yitani baruch atah Adonai lamdeni chukecha. Make, O God, the words of Torah sweet in our mouths and in the mouths of your nation, the whole house of Israel. And may we, our children and children's children, know your name and learn your Torah. Modim anachnu lach lefanecha Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei avotenu shesamta chalkeinu miyoshvei beit midrash. We thank you, O God, that you have given us a place here in a beit midrash, in a place of study. Shanu mashkimin, the divrei Torah, that we get up early in the morning to study Torah, that we burden ourselves in a good sense, that we labor with the study of Torah, that we run to study Torah and to engage in eternal pursuits. As we have learned this section of Brachot, so may God help us to begin new tractates and new works and new books and to complete them. Lilmod, l'lamed, lishmor, v'lasot, l'kayem, et kol divrei Talmud Toratecha b'Yahava. May we learn and teach and study and observe and fulfill all the words of your Torah with love. And so with that, I wish everyone a Chag Sameach, and may you have a meaningful holiday. May it be an opportunity to learn, to celebrate, and may it be an opportunity to commit ourselves to a better world, certainly as we face this particular Pesach. Boker Tov, Chag Sameach to everyone.